I bet you thought that faith was just about what you believe, but you haven't heard the whole story. I'm Michael, the Bible rethinker. It's time to rethink. Charis and pistis. Those are Greek terms. Charis and pistis were fundamental building blocks to ancient Greco-Roman society. Any person that was in the higher position might express charis to someone who was in a lesser position. For example, when somebody had the means and they saw that somebody was hungry, they might provide food for them. That was charis, to provide the charis of food to that person. Or perhaps they were sick and the person offered charis by obtaining a doctor. Or perhaps somebody was in legal trouble. A person in a more powerful position would offer charis by providing in that situation. And the appropriate way to respond to charis, the way to reciprocate charis in Greco-Roman society, was to give pistis. Pistis was about loyalty. It was about allegiance. So once somebody had given you charis, you would respond with pistis. For example, once somebody had been generous with you, you would respond by trying to meet their needs in other ways. For example, if they were to travel, you might travel with them to assist them. Or if the person in a higher position had to go into war, you would go with them to help assist them and to meet their needs. And so these were the basic building blocks of how society functioned. There were those who gave, that was called charis, and there were those who received, but they respond with pistis. This happened on a macro level in ancient Rome. For example, if there was a city that was destroyed in an earthquake, the emperor would express charis by financing the rebuilding of the town. Or he might provide grain and other food for the people who were in great need. In fact, there are many instances where there were famines in the ancient Roman world where the emperor provided in those instances. And when he did so, the word for that was charis. St. Paul was working from this cultural mindset when he wrote a letter to the Ephesians, and he said to them, "For by charis you have been saved." It is as if you fell into a swimming pool and you were drowning and somebody jumped in to rescue you. No, it's more than that. It's like you had drowned in a pool and somebody jumped in to rescue you from the pool and was able to resuscitate you back to life. That's the image Paul gives of what happened to the believers in Ephesus, that they were dead. But God jumped in to rescue them in the midst of their death. Now, in what way were they dead? Well, they are dead in the sense that they were under the control of sin, that they worshiped false gods. They were in captivity to those false gods. So they were dead in a sense. And God jumped in, and he did so by sending Jesus. And by the work of Jesus, they were saved from this captivity to sin and this captivity to idolatry. And so God expressed charis. We translate that grace. Sometimes we translate it a gift. For example, when Paul talked to the Christians in Corinth and he spoke of spiritual gifts, those were spiritual charis. So charis can be a gift, it's an expression of generosity, or we can translate it grace. God jumped in and rescued us when we were dead, unable to help ourselves. and only by his salvific work were we rescued. He gave us grace. Now, in order for us to experience that grace and enter into this covenant or this relationship with God, it involves not only God's expression of charis, but like I said, charis is reciprocated or mirrored back in the form of pistis. Paul said, "For you have been saved by grace through pistis, through faith, through allegiance, through trust, through loyalty, through faithfulness." Pistis, the word pistis, includes all of these ideas. And so if we ever think of faith only in the sense of it being belief, we've really truncated, we've diminished the full meaning, the full intent of the word pistis. Our response to God's grace is our allegiance to him. When the emperor gave food, gave finances to towns in ancient Rome, his expectation was to have the allegiance of the people in response. The people responded with their pistis, with their allegiance to the emperor. And in an analogous way, God jumped in and rescued us, saved us. It was an expression of grace. And the way we respond to that grace is with faith. Now, so often, especially in Protestant thinking, we have tended to dichotomize faith and works. But that's really a false dichotomy. This passage is one of the texts that seems to substantiate that dichotomy, because Paul goes on to say that we're saved through faith, not by works. And we've had the assumption for a long time that when Paul says works, he's talking about doing good things. But that's not what Paul is getting at. In the broader scope of what's going on in this letter to the Ephesians, Paul describes the Jews that follow Jesus and the Gentiles who follow Jesus as being this new body. The dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile is broken down because of what Jesus has done. And what Paul wanted the Ephesians to understand is that the markers that identified them as the people of God were not the works such as circumcision, the food laws, Sabbath day observance, those fundamental markers of the old covenant that identified the Israelites as the people of God. But that is no longer the identifier of who God's people are. Paul would argue that they're identified not by those particular works, but they're identified by their faith, by their trust, by their loyalty, by their faithfulness to Jesus. That's the only way the next verse in Ephesians makes sense. Paul said, "For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do what? To do good works." How do we live out pistis? Pistis is lived out through our actions. And these are actions that God prepared in advance for us to do. He gave us this new life. He saved us from death. He rescued us from death so that we could respond with our faithfulness to him. I'd love to hear what you think about this video. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you have any comments? Do you have any questions? I would love to hear from you in the comments section. Please be sure to subscribe to my channel and visit my website, thebiblerethinker.org.